by descending, that we may know the power of your love. Amen. So, for the last 4 weeks or so, we've been hearing stories of Jesus teaching us to hear the gospel and be disciples like little children. We're supposed to make ourselves little and vulnerable, and he puts a child on his lap and points to the child in order to give us a physical example of what a child does or what a child represents. Innocence, childlike love, vulnerability, and the need for good parents and good teachers. But there's another side of children that the disciples are living into, which is fighting over who gets to sit in the front seat with mommy when she drives the station wagon, who gets the biggest piece of cake, and who gets to judge at the end of the world. Because that's what sitting at the right hand and left hand of Jesus means, that you're on the judgment seat and you get to decide who goes down and who goes up. So they're acting like children, and that's what Jesus said, but they don't get which kind of children. We're supposed to be receptive to being little and seeking not power, but humility. It goes against the grain of being human, and it goes against the grain especially of our governments and our cities and the way the world works. So as we get closer to this time where Jesus is crucified, which is where we're coming up in the story here, the readings get a little tougher and demand a little bit more from us. One of the things that's a little tricky about this is that Jesus is referring to baptism. Now, we're used to baptism being a baptism with what substance? Water. And the baptism itself involves somebody else, the baptizer, doing something to you. What does the baptizer do? Dunks you in the water or puts water over your head. So there has to be somebody else involved. You can't baptize yourself, right? So Jesus is talking about a different kind of baptism when he says, are you ready to be baptized with the baptism that I must be baptized with? He said baptism in one way or another 6 times by the time this reading is over, so I think it's important. And he's talking about the baptism of his passion. Now, we have a hint because he talks about drinking the cup, and in Hebrew Testament language, drinking the cup is often equated with drinking the cup of sorrow or drinking the cup of suffering. So there's a hint. Are you ready to drink the cup of sorrow or suffering, in order to be baptized in the baptism with which I will be baptized? And that is suffering, extreme suffering, and death. And then lying dormant for 3 days. And then what happens after that? Rise again. So our journey on earth is a process of getting lower and lower in the estimation of our governments and our rulers and our culture and money. We're supposed to become more humble as we walk this pilgrimage road of our faith. So I get actually smaller. By the time we die, we're so near to the ground that it's not much work to get into the grave. Right? So if we're trying to be the bossiest guy in the government, we're not going in the right direction as far as our Christian belief system goes. One of the ways of looking at this that's fairly meaningful is to look back on your own life and think about how you were as a child. And the first time that you either got bullied or disciplined in a way that wasn't fair. But people didn't want to hear how that wasn't fair. It's just what you have to experience that as a child. You were wrong, you get in trouble, it hurts, and it feels awful. Think about a time when you were maybe bullied or hurt that wasn't fair in the extreme, but you didn't tell anybody because you were ashamed of what had happened. This happens to many, many people, men and women. And what we learn to do if we don't learn to love that part of us that didn't get heard, we learn to hide it away. And if it hides away, it's not being dealt with. Because the child in us needs to be dealt dealt with. So we pull out that child and take a good look and see if we reacted to being hurt as a child and then became hurtful people ourselves, or whether we learned as an adult to love that child and to make up for all the hurts that you suffered as a child. Both my daughter and my son were bullied in high school, and they didn't tell me about it because they didn't think I could do anything. Going to school wouldn't help, because then everybody would know that your mother came and fought for you. So it's typical of kids not to tell their moms. And then some of the bullies who were bullies never own up to the fact that they were bullies, and then they react with anger towards the people that they are not reconciled with. You cannot reconcile with other people if you haven't reconciled with what's happened to you. So that's where our humility starts. It starts on our inside job that we do. And what Jesus is trying to teach his companions, and notice he doesn't yell at them for being children. He knows they're children. He knows they're having a hard time with this. He has just finished in the scripture telling them for the third time, I am going into Jerusalem where I will be ridiculed and arrested. I will be judged guilty and I will be put to death and I will die and I will rise on the third day. And they don't get it. And he's saying, then you need to learn how to be servants. Pow, right there. So, aren't they servants yet? No. They've gone out and they've worked miracles with Jesus, and they've come back successful. They haven't quite learned how to be servants yet. And we haven't learned to be servants yet because it's a job that never gets done. We are never very good at this. But by humbling ourselves and being the first to volunteer to feed the hungry at the food pantry, the first to volunteer to go and knock on doors and serve meals on wheels, there's a lot of things you can do to be servants. But none of them are very easy, and you have to sign up, and then you have to stay committed to it. This is our season of stewardship. We have 1 week of a stewardship season. It starts this Sunday, and Stewardship Sunday is next Sunday. And we ask to share time and talent and treasure. So most of us are pretty understanding about the treasure part. We write checks. We put in cash. We know about that. But this ability to lower ourselves and volunteer to be a servant of something is more difficult. So I charge you all with thinking, how can you serve others? It doesn't have to be in church. It can be in our community. It doesn't have to be in the community. It can be in your family. It doesn't have to be acknowledged, because if you're doing it secretly, that's the best of all. It's a secret between you and Jesus. So what is the lesson? The lesson is we all have hubris. We all want to be on top. We don't want to suffer. We want a pretty house and lots of clothes. That's human. The reality is we're Christians. We have another way. We get littler. We throw things off. We spend money because we can. And we try to get rid of it before we die. Get lower in order to be brought up by Jesus Christ himself. Amen.